Dissent with the federal government's tariffs began to take hold and spread throughout the state. It reached a peak when in 1832 the state reacted by adopting the Ordinance of Nullification. This ordinance stated that the tariff laws of 1828 and 1832 were null and void in the state of South Carolina. The Federal Army was alerted as President Andrew Jackson considered sending troops to enforce the tariff laws. In 1833, Congress passed a compromise measure that temporarily diffused the situation. But a new line in the sand had already been drawn. Thomas Williams, who had arrived in the Barnwell district south of Orangeburg around 1801, had a son in 1835 that he named John Calhoun Williams in honor of the United States Vice President John C. Calhoun, the revered South Carolinian who drafted the Ordinance of Nullification. John Calhoun Williams became the grandfather of Annie Culler Watson. In Ridge Spring, Elijah Watson, son of Captain Michael and Martha, was a justice of the quorum and a member of the legislature in 1832, and he was himself a nullifier. A rift between a strong federal government and strong state governments, as well as tensions between free states and slave states, was bringing the country to the brink of war. The southern states were beginning to think if they seceded from the United States and formed their own country, they might be able to maintain the way of life they had become accustomed to. The first organized meeting to discuss seceding from the Union took place in South Carolina, and war would soon follow. In the meantime, however, the community continued to grow and flourish. James Irwin Moss, son of Stephen Moss II and Anne Irwin, married Selina Catherine Stroman, who was from the area between Norway and Springfield, South Carolina. They built a home around 1830 which still stands today. There they raised their 7 children. Their son, James Michael Moss, was born 2 years after they married. Chloe Ann Watson and her husband Elijah were also raising their family in Ridge Spring, South Carolina. The house in which they lived is also still standing. Their son Elijah Jr. married Jane Elizabeth Briggs in 1835. The Watson family was very involved in the church they attended in Ridge Spring. After her husband died, Chloe and her son Elijah Jr. gave the land for the Ridge Spring Baptist Church to be built, and Elijah Jr. paid for at least half of the cost of the construction of the original building. Chloe, her son, and his wife Jane Elizabeth have been memorialized at the current Ridge Spring Baptist Church with stained glass window dedications for their years of generous service and involvement. The Watson family cemetery is also in Ridge Spring. Chloe had slaves build the rock wall there that still surrounds the cemetery today. Elijah Jr. and Jane Elizabeth had 11 children. Michael Wimberly Watson was their 7th, born in 1851. Jacob Culler had a large plantation, and after having twice been a widower, married Sarah Elizabeth Inabnet in 1834. Sarah Elizabeth had 4 ancestors who fought in the Revolutionary War, and both she and Jacob were each descended from one of the Schomloffel sisters.
Sarah Elizabeth Inabnet was 16 years old when she married him, and I think he was 54. So I wonder about a 16-year-old girl, marrying this 54-year-old man.
2 of Jacob's 4 living children were older than Sarah Elizabeth when she became their stepmother.
But anyway, I think about her, and she's a beautiful lady. She really was. And she came into a nice house because Jacob had several hundred slaves and had at one time over 7,000 acres of land. So he was quite well-to-do planter.
In the fall of 1848, Jacob's oldest daughter, Emily, climbed aboard a covered wagon with her husband and 5 children. Her youngest, born in October of that year, was just an infant when they left South Carolina.
Bad and almost impassable roads, swollen rivers with dangerous crossings, sparsely settled and undeveloped country, much of which was occupied by Indians, none too friendly, with sickness of children and slaves oftentimes causing delays of sometimes weeks, marked a period of thrills and incidents in her life. Hugh Clayton Culler.
In the spring of 1849, they reached their destination of Chickasaw County, Mississippi. John Calhoun Williams, the son of Thomas Williams of Barnwell District, grew up around this time. He married Julia Chitty, also of Barnwell District. They had a very large farm, and he was named Master Farmer of the area. Among other things, he grew watermelons and other produce. A side track off the main railroad line was built to his farm so rail cars could be backed up to his property to pick up produce. John and Julia married right around the time the rumblings of war were beginning.